All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. We are following new details right now about an FBI arrest on Thursday into that 5-year-old investigation into pipe bombs found outside of the headquarters of the Republican and Democratic National Parties in Washington on the eve of January 6th. 2021. And these were some of the images we were getting into our newsroom earlier on today as they have arrested this individual in this case, Brian Cole Jr., as the arrest marks the first time investigators settled on a suspect in an act that had long vexed law enforcement, spawning a multitude of conspiracy theories, remained an enduring mystery in the shadow of a dark chapter of American history. The suspect in custody, identified as Brian Cole. Two of the people said living in Woodbridge. This is where the aerials we're looking at right now. Let's continue on here on Live Now from Fox, because these pipe bombs were placed on the evening of January 5th, 2021, near the offices of the DNC and RNC in Washington, D.C. Nobody was hurt before the bombs were rendered safe. The FBI said both devices could have been lethal. Let's continue on here on Live Now from Fox and bring into the conversation someone that knows quite a bit about all of this. Former FBI special agent, a master bomb tech, Barry Black. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And it's interesting to see that this investigation took this long to find this individual. What are they looking for when they're at this individual's home in Woodbridge, Virginia?
Well, when those devices were rendered safe, there was a good bit of information that was recovered, components to the device itself. So I would anticipate they're looking for documentation regarding construction of the devices. It appears that some of the similar components were purchased even after these two IEDs were put down prior to the January 6 events. So records pertaining to their purchase, their construction, and even some of the components themselves that were purchased after these two devices were made.
Yeah, I do want to get into that, some of this, Barry, because obviously as a master bomb technician, you have been focusing on Oklahoma City, the Atlanta Olympic bombing, and others that obviously infamous in American history. I do want to list some of these here on Live Now from Fox of what they found in this criminal complaint. As the FBI saying there was a 1-inch by 8-inch pipe, the end caps affixed to the pipe, some 16-gauge electrical wire, alligator clips, the 9-volt battery and connector, a white kitchen timer, paper clips, steel wool, homemade black powder. In terms of this, Barry, is this something that's frequent in a type of pipe bomb? Is this what you would expect to find?
Yeah, certainly. The pipe bombs are most common in this country, galvanized steel or even PVC. As I understand it, there were half a dozen of those types of pipes purchased, a commensurate number of end caps purchased as well. The alligator clips, the kitchen timers, the steel wool, all of the things that were discovered after the render safe procedure were tied directly to purchases by Mr. Cole.
And they said they were lethal. Can you give us an understanding? It took them 17 plus hours to find them, but they didn't go off. No one was hurt. How lethal could this have been?
Well, pipe bombs are, by definition, a lethal device with an explosive filler material such as black powder, even homemade black powder. They will burn at a very high rate. The gas that's produced from that burning overcomes the container's strength, and it ruptures them very, very violently. So the bits and pieces of that pipe would be projected at high rates of speed and produce property damage, personal injury, and even death.
Yeah, and obviously we're looking at some of this surveillance video that they had to piece it together, and this individual might have surveilled the region. And we do know that they were in Woodbridge, Virginia, potentially living with their parents. In terms of the net that the FBI cast for this, just based on the ability of him to surveil the area, does that give him a sense that it could have been close to D.C.? Do you think that is a possibility?
Well, obviously, pre-planning, if you know where the two locations were, the RNC and DNC were both very near the capital region. He was in Woodbridge, Virginia, not that far from the DC area. So potential surveillance is obviously possible. I'm certain the FBI and our partners have gone through all the available video and still imagery leading up to the placement of these devices. And there'll be more information to gather after these search warrants.
In terms of just the bomb device, some of the background is they're looking for a motivation in all of this. Does this dictate of a sophisticated person, someone that is familiar with this type of devices?
Pipe bombs are relatively simple to construct. This was a rudimentary type of device. It was a mechanical timer, kitchen timer with alligator clips for connections. So there wasn't a great deal of, I would say, electronic prowess. There was no integrated circuit boards or homemade circuitry involved. Relatively simple firing train, but lethal nonetheless.
So did this potentially just not go off, or was it not set up correctly? Obviously, just based on these limited details that we have, can you glean any information about that?
Well, making a bad bomb doesn't mean you're not a bomber. So fortunately, they did not detonate. The way the devices were constructed, from what we know, that's been released publicly, there would have been potential for this to misfire, which is when the device does not function as intended. The way the electrical circuitry was constructed, there, if you're a bomber, perhaps better ways to do it. But fortunate for us that those did not detonate.
Yeah, thankfully, no one was hurt in terms of this and all of it. And obviously, you mentioned some of the devices that they were acquired from Home Depot back in 2019 to 2020. When they're going through the home right now, some of these pieces of evidence won't be there anymore. Are there any pieces of residue that date back that they can look that goes back in time a little bit? Is there anything in particular that you would find interesting inside this home?
Well, one thing that confounds these types of investigations is the components for these devices are very readily available. It appears that there were purchases at Home Depot, Walmart, an electronics shop for very common devices. But in your own home, do you happen to have half a dozen 6 or 8 inch, 1 inch pipes with twice as many end caps, the alligator clips, the steel wool, and those purchases that were made after these two devices were laid down? I don't believe we know where those components are, so it's possible they're still in the house, and I would imagine those are the types of things that agents are looking for now.
What other questions, Barry, do you have? Because you have an extensive background and experience on this. Is there a certain scent that you're looking for? What else questions do you have about this investigation?
Well, a lone wolf is difficult. I testified before Congress, Barry Loudermilk subcommittee, and they were wondering, why it could take so long. I have to point out, it took 17 years to find Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and another 5 years to find Eric Rudolph. These are exhaustive investigations. There are 340 million people in the United States, and when these devices were laid down, the person was completely covered. We really couldn't tell gender, race. They were wearing a hoodie, glasses, face mask, gloves. The investigations are, as I said, exhaustive, down to what types of shoes were worn, the types of backpack that was there. So it takes time to go through millions of lines of data and credit card purchases and videos.
And this individual lived at that home in Woodbridge, Virginia, potentially with his mom or his parents there as well. You mentioned the lone wolf. Can a lone wolf live with their parents? Is that a possibility?
Well, yes, of course. There's the kind of popular saying now about, whatever people may do in their mom's basement. There was a popular kind of online magazine entitled How to Build a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom. So a lot of these people that are radicalized may be living at home. I've investigated bombings where the roommates of a bomber smelled something odd, saw something odd, but they didn't know their roommate was constructing an IED. So it's entirely possible that a bomber could be living with mom and dad and the parents just not know what's going on.
And the fact that this was at the RNC and the DNC, two of those main conventions of the two parties in Washington, D.C., how particular are they looking into this? Is there anyone else involved? Because I know the FBI very much involved in this. The particular location of where these were placed, does that expand the investigation?
Well, the location themselves would certainly play into whether terrorism charges could be brought. The motivation for where the devices would be placed. Oftentimes, people will leave what's commonly known as a manifesto or some rationale for doing what they did. And I imagine that's one thing the investigators are looking for now via social media or stuck in the desk drawer there at the house. But the motivation for placing IEDs at those two locations at that particular time may tend to indicate there was some political motivation.
All right, very good, Barry Black. And as you said, just because the bomb doesn't go off doesn't necessarily mean that this individual, not a bomber, as the suspect they believe to be involved in this on the eve of January 6th, now in custody. Barry, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your insight here on Live Now.
My pleasure, Andy. Thank you.